Mountain State Mysteries contains adult content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm your host, Mark.
And I'm Courtney.
And this is Mountain State Mysteries. Today, we want to tell you the story of a Huntington matriarch who was murdered in her sprawling mansion along Huntington's elite millionaires row. This is the story of Juliette Buffington Enslow. Juliette Buffington Enslow was born on March 9, 1873 in Huntington, West Virginia. She was the daughter of Peter Climb Buffington, who had the distinction of being the first mayor of Huntington, and Louisa I. Garland Buffington. She was the granddaughter of William Buffington, who was Cabell County's first surveyor. Her great-grandfather William Buffington was one of the early settlers of the region, so her roots grew deep in the area. Her first husband was Charles Baldwin. Their child was Charles Baldwin Jr., who was born January 7, 1895, in Athens, Georgia. After the death of Juliette's first husband, she married Frank Enslow, a lawyer who was known as one of the most influential men in West Virginia. He kept busy in Huntington's business and civic affairs and served as president of the Huntington National Bank. Frank also owned extensive properties in Huntington and was involved in the development of oil and gas throughout West Virginia.
In 1890, he built one of the area's most elegant homes, boasting 27 rooms, marble fireplaces, and Tiffany chandeliers. Located at 1307 3rd Avenue, it was the scene of many lavish parties and of meeting places of Huntington society. They lived in their home together with their daughter Dorothy, who was born on October 22, 1902. Frank's sons, Frank Enslow Jr. and Juliette's son, Charles. Frank passed away on February 7, 1917 in Charleston, West Virginia. As time went on, Juliette stayed in her and Frank's home with two servants and her son Charles. Juliette was last seen alive at 10:30 p.m. on October 16, 1936. That night, her son Charles had 3 visitors over playing bridge in the parlor. Also in the home was the housekeeper and companion of Juliette, Elizabeth Bricker, who went by Lizzie, so we will call her Lizzie from here on out, as well as staff of servants.
You're listening to Mountain State Mysteries. The morning of October 17th, 1936 started as a typical morning at the home of Juliette Buffington Enslow. Her staff started to arrive to her mansion around 8:30 a.m. Juliette's chauffeur, Judge Johnson, was sweeping the sidewalk around the house when he noticed Juliette's wallet lying in the driveway. He brought it inside to the housekeeper, Lizzie Bricker. She rushed into Juliette's room, where she found Juliette on the floor, beaten and bloody with a towel wrapped around her neck. They found 5 stab marks in her head, believed to have been made with an ice pick, as well as defensive wounds on her hands. They noticed that blood covered the sheets and pillows on Juliette's bed. They both noticed that the rings Juliette wore to bed had been torn from her fingers. Her wristwatch was missing, and a dresser drawer was open as if valuables had been snatched from it. The servants rushed to awaken Charles, who was asleep in his suite, located in another section of the house. Charles, dressed in his pajamas, rushed into his mother's room and to her side. Investigators were called to the scene and they suspected that Juliette had been awakened and struggled with her assailant. Although the towel indicated that strangulation was the leading cause of her death, they also noticed the abrasions on her face and forehead that they also said would have been made with an ice pick. It appeared that Juliette had risen from bed after her attacker fled and pulled a signal cord connected to the kitchen before succumbing to her injuries and falling to the floor. The cook, Nellie Bias, told police that Juliette customarily pulled the signal cord in the morning to signal for her breakfast. Bias noticed that the cord had been pulled when she arrived for work that morning, so she immediately began to prepare breakfast.
After the authorities arrived, they located the 2 rings in the yard near where Johnson had found the wallet. Authorities began to wonder why, if it rained all night, how the wallet was found outside dry, leading to speculation that it had been planted. There were no fingerprints found in the room and no sign of forced entry, leading police to believe that it was an inside job. They theorized that the burglar had entered through the guest window and after the struggle had exited the home through the window of the dressing room. Juliette's funeral was held in her beautiful mansion and she was laid to rest in Spring Hill Cemetery. You're listening to Mountain State Mysteries.
Just 4 days after the murder, the citizens of Huntington were shocked when they read the newspaper headline, 41-year-old Charles Baldwin had been charged with the murder of his mother. His trial was scheduled for March 25, 1937. The witness list read like a social register for the Ohio River town. As the trial started, Charles appeared to be soft-spoken as he maintained his innocence and his plea of not guilty. The former Army captain impressed the public when he entered the courtroom supported by a cane due to the loss of his leg in an accident several years before. The prosecutors called Dr. Walter E. Vest to the stand. Dr. Vest testified that he had registered Baldwin as a drug addict in 1935. Under the conditions of the registration, Baldwin was allowed 5 grams of the drug each day. To protect the addict, the drug was overseen by Miss Enslow, who gave him his prescribed amount on a strictly regulated time schedule. The prosecution maintained that Baldwin had killed his mother to get more of the drug. As evidence, they submitted a can opener from Baldwin's room, which they believed to have been the murder weapon. They maintained that Baldwin had taken the can opener to his mother's room, where he had planned to use it to break the lock, protecting the drugs. They also submitted Baldwin's pajamas, which were stained with what was believed to be his own mother's blood.
The prosecution maintained that Baldwin was desperate because his mother was trying to break him of his drug habit by limiting his supply. The state hoped to show that the blood on his pajamas was the result of the struggle with his mother during the murder. The state maintained that it had found 2 bloody handkerchiefs and a bloody key to the bathroom of Juliette's in the basement hidden by Baldwin. The handicapped Army captain proved to be an impressive witness. As a former attorney, he was comfortable and convincing on the stand. Baldwin stated that the blood stain on his pajamas was his mother's, but he got it when he embraced his mother after finding her body. He also maintained the drug theory was simply ridiculous. Baldwin also stated that he obtained more than 400 grams of the narcotic during a recent trip to Canada and that he had far more in his possession than the 5 grams his mother guarded.
The defense maintained that the murder had been committed by a robber who was surprised by Miss Enslow. They produced witnesses who claimed to have seen a prowler around the sprawling Enslow mansion that night. The witnesses also testified that they heard screams and later saw a car leaving the house. A list of character witnesses from some of Huntington's most prominent families took the stand in defense of Baldwin. Among them was his half-sister by a later marriage, who testified that there was nothing but love, affection, and understanding between him and his mother. You're listening to Mountain State Mysteries. The trial lasted 9 days before the jury was released to deliberate. After 2 hours, the jury returned with a verdict of not guilty for Charles Baldwin. With his characteristic charm and grace, Baldwin immediately stepped forward to shake hands with the members of the jury. Following the verdict, Huntington police returned to search for the murderer of Juliette Buffington Enslow, but to no avail.
Huntington police returned to search, and on February 27, 1940, one of Juliette's diamond rings was found in a catch basin behind the Enslow mansion. It is described as a large diamond solitaire set in platinum with a black onyx mounting. Huntingtons were skeptical that such a large ring could sit there for almost 4 years and survive the 1937 flood. However, the case was not reopened.
So you might ask yourself, who killed Juliette Buffington Enslow? Was it her son? At the time of the murder, he was not practicing law and was living with his mother. Could he have been short on money? Could he have been mad with her having control over his drugs? Could Lizzie have been an accomplice? Was she more than just a housekeeper to Charles? Maybe Charles Guest murdered her. Unfortunately, these are the questions that we have that will never be answered.
Another sad fate to go with the story is the Enslow mansion. It ended up being sold and was a steel funeral home for many years until it tragically burned to the ground in a fire. We believe that someone knew the truth, someone with access to the stolen rings. Sadly, we will never know.
If you have any information on the case of Juliette Buffington Enslow, email us at mountainstatemysteries304@gmail.com. Courtney, do you have any final thoughts on this case?
Well, you kind of wonder, like, in the bridge game, like, was all Charles, like, hopped up on something? You know, I mean, he said he had, like, 400 grams of whatever narcotic he'd done, so maybe he was really just messed up on whatever he took, and maybe he murdered his mother and didn't even realize it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's just so many different things. Could one of the guests have done it? Or, surely to goodness, I mean, while this was going on, somebody would have heard her, I mean, you would have heard noises coming from the bedroom as she was being murdered and her being strangulated. Is that right? Strangled. You would have heard noises while she was being strangled. I mean,
I'm going to get a shirt made for you that says strangulated.
It's a new word. Webster, if you're listening to this, strangulated, new word. But, I mean, it does make you wonder, like, if there was people still there or anything, there's no time of this murder when it happened that was mentioned. So it just makes you wonder if it was of the early evening, later at the night, early morning, things of that nature. It just makes you wonder, could it have been a guest? Could it have been a servant? Could somebody had heard all of this going down? And if someone was there, why didn't they rush to her side to see what was going on? It just makes you wonder. So, Mark, do you have any final thoughts?
She was strangulated and stabbed. Those are my final thoughts. I kind of have the same thoughts as you. Just coming across this case randomly like we did, and then just really doing a deep dive into it, I've always believed it was her son that did it. I've always believed that it was over the drugs and possibly money because, the rings were missing, her wallet was missing. Who's to say he didn't try to sneak in and go get his mom's wallet to buy some more drugs on the corner or something? I mean, you never know. Do I think Lizzie had something to do with it? I'm not sure. I do think people would hear unless she was on the totally opposite side of the house and people were downstairs and it was just a very quiet house at night. I'm not sure, but I definitely do believe Charles committed the murder. Next time on Mountain State Mysteries, join us as we tell you the story of a woman who was abducted at an Amoco service station in Beaver, West Virginia in 1977. If you find yourself enjoying Mountain State Mysteries, take a second to follow, download, share, and rate it on your favorite podcasting service. It helps others find good true crime podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and wherever you listen to podcasts, all at Mountain State Mysteries. For the show notes, check out our website, mountainstatemysteriespodcast.com.